Make no mistake, these ongoing attacks are based on religion, and diverting attention from it denies what we have seen with our own eyes. Yeah, there may be other factors, but religion is driving this. Kill the infidel. We see it in other places, and we're seeing it now, sadly, in Nigeria, and it's been going on for many, many years. 13 years ago, in this room, 2012, I chaired a hearing focusing on the slaughter of Christians by Boko Haram, and the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Johnny Carson, testified at that hearing and said, and I quote in part, that the phenomena of Boko Haram is one of discrediting the central government in power for its failure to deliver services to the people. I asked him at the time, are you kidding? I responded by asking why Boko Haram abducts and rapes Christian girls and uses force and coercion, even death, to convert Christians to Islam. On a trip to an IDP camp in Jos, I met many survivors. One man who we had testify here, named Adama, who they took him out of his house. His wife was screaming, please don't hurt my husband. They put a AK-47 to his cheek and said, you renounce your faith or we'll kill you. He said, well, I'm ready to meet my Lord. They asked him again. He repeated that, and they shot him. They blew his face very, very horribly. He survived. And when I met him, I invited him to come and testify. He did. And he said, you've got to realize who Boko Haram is and stop this idea, this is my words, but his sentiment of denial, of saying, it's nothing to see here. So I asked Johnny Carson further, why won't they designate Boko Haram, at least, if not a CPC country, as a foreign terrorist organization? And he said they don't believe it. They're not a foreign terrorist organization. I worked on that for 3 years, additional hearings. On the day I was marking up my bill, and it was called the Boko Haram Terrorist Designation Act of 2013, to put Congress on record demanding an FDO designation, that day, the administration declared Boko Haram a foreign terrorist organization. I was very happy with it, but we could have done that 3 years earlier, maybe had found out what their sources of weapons and funding and everything else might have been, thereby, again, mitigating some of the harm. For too long, the world has looked away, a culture of denial, as radical Fulani militants, Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa have waged a relentless campaign of terror, murder, and displacement across Nigeria, including the states of Plateau, Benue, and Kaduna. According to Open Doors, and I just want to say something about Open Doors, I've worked with Open Doors for 40 years. I knew the founder, Brother Andrew, an absolutely honest and committed man, and that organization to this day continues to speak truth to power all over the world, including in Nigeria. Well, they have said, Open Doors, more Christians are slaughtered in Nigeria than anywhere else in the world. I co-chair the China Commission. I just left a hearing that we're holding over on the Senate side on religious persecution there, against everyone, against the Falun Gong, against the Christians, against the Buddhists in Xinjiang, not the Buddhists, Buddhists in Tibet, and the Muslims in Xinjiang. And while they kill many, they incarcerate and harass more than they slaughter. These groups in Nigeria are doing just that, slaughtering. Another group has said over 52,000 Christians in Nigeria have reportedly been targeted and killed by Islamist extremists, while approximately 34,000 moderate Muslims have been murdered as well since 2009. And, that is less focused upon. I raise it every time, and I hope we all will. They're killing those who don't conform to the radical Islamist view, and so they get killed too. I met with many imams on trips to Nigeria as well as here, and they say if we speak out, we'll be firebombed too. During a visit, 19,000 churches have also been attacked, more than 7,000 have been murdered in this year alone. During my visit to Jos in 2013, I visited many churches that have been firebombed in Jos, and I listened to the survivors and was moved almost to tears, and to tears with some, when they talked about the numbing loss and pain of losing loved ones. And the churches were decimated, each and every one of them, either by cars coming in and plowing everybody and destroying the physical, or by bombs, and of course always the ever-present AK-47. They pleaded with their own government and the world to end the cruelty and violence. and I've been raising it, as have many others ever since. About 5 million Christians have been displaced and forced into internally displaced persons camps within Nigeria and refugee camps at regional and sub-regional borders, according to an Inter-Society report. Open Doors reports, and again, I hope we can finally get beyond just saying nothing's to see here. While Christians used to be vulnerable only to Muslim-majority northern states, this violence continues to spread into the Middle Belt and even further south. The attacks are shockingly brutal. Many believers are killed, particularly men, while women are often kidnapped and targeted for what? Sexual violence, rape, and other abuse. More believers are killed for their faith in Nigeria than anywhere else in the world. These militants also destroy homes, churches, and livelihoods, and many people don't go to school anymore. One estimate is 10,000 schools have been closed due to this violence. The Nigerian government has a fundamental constitutional obligation to protect its own citizens. Yet the brutal reality is that the perpetrators of these crimes operate with impunity. The lack of accountability sends a chilling message that the lives of Christian farmers and their families are expendable. This failure has rightfully been called out by the President of the United States, President Trump, and Secretary of State Rubio. The United States must not stand by idly. I've introduced resolutions, and others have been introduced as well. H-Res 82, I had done that previously on 82, asking that the Biden administration, we had an interesting conversation and debate on that resolution. It did pass 26 to 21. And part of the argument that was made by Mr. Meeks and my very distinguished colleague to my left is that it's the President and the Secretary of State that needs to make that call, not us. I think we can encourage something. That's what it did. But nevertheless, now they've made the call. And I think we need to, double down and try to stop this. H-Res 860, which I've introduced, also calls on conditioning U.S. foreign assistance, and it must be tied to progress from the Nigerian government in preventing persecution, prosecuting perpetrators, and protecting all communities. Second, it would provide direct humanitarian assistance, especially the faith-based groups working on the ground in the Middle Belt. What we're hearing is that it's not getting through. People are hungry, so we need to make sure that they're helped. And third, we must impose targeted sanctions pursuant to the Global Magnitsky Act, using visa bans and access freezes against individuals and entities responsible for these gross human rights abuses. President Trump, as I conclude, said, Christianity is facing an existential threat in Nigeria. The United States cannot stand by while atrocities are happening in Nigeria. I yield to my good friend and colleague, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of the witnesses who are going to be testifying today on conflict and religious persecution in Nigeria. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation we'll have with Ambassador Pratt and Deputy Assistant Secretary McGee, as this committee is long overdue to hold a hearing with Trump administration officials. The African continent continues to be both increasingly important and increasingly overlooked. The continent is the youngest in the world, and in Nigeria alone, 70% of the population is under 35, and 40% is under 15. So it represents the future generations who will continue to lead and solve the world's problems. Nigeria has a unique position as a bellwether, as Africa's largest economy, most populous nation, and a significant actor in the region and on the world stage. And meanwhile, Nigeria is facing its own challenges, like rising insecurity, shrinking freedom of expression, and a struggling economy. So let's talk about the very real conflict and violence happening in Nigeria. Nigeria is facing multiple different security challenges in various parts of the country, including violent extremist groups in the Northeast, criminal banditry in the Northwest, and across the country, farmer-herder conflict in the Middle Belt, and other intercommunal violence in central and northern regions. Several factors are driving these conflicts. Yes, ethnicity and religion play a role in some cases, but other dynamics like poor governance, resource competition, climate change, and population pressures are important drivers that need to be addressed. I appreciate the chairman's passion on this and his long work on Nigeria. I think it's a distortion to say that what we're trying to say is that there's nothing to see here. In fact, there is something to see here. There is very real conflict and violence that we need to address. I've been working on addressing conflict in Nigeria since 2013, 2014, when I was part of the counter Boko Haram strategy at the State Department. The violence impacting both Christian and Muslim communities is real, and the Nigerian government can and should do more to address it. I was horrified to learn of the killing of 2 people and the kidnapping of the pastor and a worshiper at a church in Kwara State. And this came only a few days after, as the chairman mentioned, criminal bandits kidnapped 25 girls in Kebbi State. But it is counterproductive to adopt oversimplistic narratives about the multiple complex overlapping security challenges and violence across the country. The victims in the Kebbi State kidnapping were all Muslim girls. So violence affects everyone, and false narratives perpetuate harmful stereotypes and motivate tensions and violence based on religious identity. Distorting what's happening into a solely religious narrative erases the real drivers of violence and makes it harder to implement effective solutions. And it can fuel violence against the very groups the Trump administration claims it wants to protect. That's why I'm alarmed by President Trump's rhetoric about this violence and threats to go into Nigeria, guns a-blazing, and to wipe out terrorists. We are already receiving reports of increased tensions between Christian and Muslim populations following this rhetoric. President Trump's threat is reckless, and any unilateral military action in Nigeria would be illegal. Congress has not authorized force in Nigeria to protect Christians, and any action without Nigeria's consent violates international law. We also know that a military-first response won't actually address the violence and will do very little to protect Christian communities. As I said, I worked on Nigeria policy since I was at the State Department in 2014, so I know firsthand these security challenges are multifaceted, and they require a holistic approach. A military-led approach risks more civilian casualties and impunity, which will only fuel violent extremism more. So we need to use more tools from our foreign policy toolbox if we're serious about helping Nigeria protect its citizens. That means we need to leverage diplomacy and engage with Nigeria on how we can help support their response while pushing for important reforms within Nigeria's institutions. We also need to utilize foreign assistance to fund programs to help prevent violence and address conflict drivers. But the Trump administration so far has hobbled these tools. On the diplomatic front, while I'm glad to see Ambassador Pratt will be here representing the African Affairs Bureau, we still have yet to see even a nomination for an Assistant Secretary for Africa. And we don't have a Senior Director for Africa at the NSC either. There are several emergent conflicts in Africa, including in Nigeria, but also in Sudan, DRC, and across the Sahel and in Ethiopia that demand high-level, consistent, and substantive engagement. Occasional attention from the president, while most of the time welcome, won't be enough to see lasting results on all of these different crises. And on the development front, President Trump's dismantling of USAID and cuts of hundreds of millions of dollars worth foreign assistance in Nigeria is worsening the violence. For years, the United States has supported Nigerian institutions, civil society, faith-based leaders, and researchers to address the conflict, violence, and religious freedom challenges. These programs proactively prevented and directly addressed the violence this administration is now concerned about. For example, a recent article in DevEx highlighted a program that Secretary Rubio terminated, which has left a void in communities that suffer violence. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a DevEx article titled "The Cuts That Bleed: What Happens When Peace Programs Go Dark." Thank you. This article focuses on a former program implemented by Search for Common Ground, a peace-building organization that provided critical early warning in communities in Yelwata, a region in Nigeria's Middle Belt, where conflict and violence have erupted between Muslim herders and Christian farmers. This early warning program was responsible for fewer violent incidences before Secretary Rubio terminated it. In June, this same community was left in a lurch without this extra early warning support when an attack happened in Makurdi. Nearly 200 people were killed, hundreds burned alive in their homes and market stalls torched, and almost 4,000 people fled. And this is just one example where the United States has abandoned communities with no explanation. I have another article, this time from the LA Times by former USAID Foreign Service Officer Daniel Morris, that details another program that was helping prevent violence, but was discontinued. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record an LA Times article titled "Trump Cuts Nigeria's Aid Back in March, Now He Wonders Why It's So Violent." Thank you. This article discusses a program called the Community Initiatives to Promote Peace that operated in northern Nigeria. It trained community elders, including religious and tribal leaders, in conflict resolution, and the results were impressive. After giving one group training and making another one a control group for 6 months, each group was asked if their communities experienced violence. Here's what the article says. Only 10% of people in communities that received negotiation training and dialogue meetings said yes, compared to 41% of people in communities that hadn't. The Nigerians in the treatment group reported feeling more secure, more likely to walk around their communities, and less likely to avoid certain areas than those in the control group. We don't always see these kinds of results. So the fact that we were and the administration eliminated this program is incredibly short-sighted and counterproductive given their apparent interest in this issue. So if we want the United States to help prevent and address conflict in Nigeria, we can't pull back and eliminate our tools like President Trump has done. I urge the administration to reverse these decisions, nominate people at senior levels to work on Africa issues, and commit to working on this seriously, not just through a few Truth Social posts. So I look forward to hearing the testimony of Ambassador Pratt and Deputy Assistant Secretary McGee on what the State Department is planning to do to address the violence in Nigeria and how it plans to partner with Nigeria on doing so. And lastly, while I'm glad we have our witnesses here to discuss Nigeria today, I would be remiss to not also raise Sudan, since this is our first time with the State Department witnesses in front of this subcommittee this Congress, and we still have not had a budget hearing. The situation in Sudan is horrific. And while I'm glad to see this war finally getting high-level attention from President Trump, I look forward to hearing from Ambassador Pratt about what the department's plan is to both make a deal that brings a lasting end to the war in Sudan and invest in a real peace process for the Sudanese people. Thank you. I yield back.
We will now receive a testimony from Bishop Anagbe. He is leaving for a major speech in Germany, and will miss his flight if we wait until the. Thankfully, our two very distinguished witnesses from state have agreed, because normally the protocol is they go first, and I do thank them for that. But I'd like to welcome Bishop Anagbe back. He gave very compelling testimony back in March, and we all appreciated that very much. But he is in Benue State. He was ordained a Catholic priest in August of 1994, and Pope Francis elevated him to bishop in 2014. So, Bishop Anagbe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congressmember Chris Smith, the Most Reverend Wilfred Chikwa Anagbe, Bishop of the Catholic Diocese of Makurdi, Benue, Nigeria, before the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, African Subcommittee, November 20, 2025. President Trump's redesignation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern, CPC, a serious, well-founded wake-up call. I am here this evening talking that because I have the privilege of witnessing, the privilege of experiencing. I'm not talking as a privilege of opinion. Mr. Chairman, ranking members, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me back to testify on the escalating crisis of Christian persecution and genocide in Nigeria. 6 months ago, precisely on 13th March 2025, when I last appeared before this committee, I warned that the situation was there and demanded urgent attention. Tragically, the past half year has proven those warnings understated the continued attack on vulnerable Christian villages by the Fulani ethnic militia and their counterparts, both in the Middle Belt of Nigeria and elsewhere in the country. Since my testimony in March 2025, credible reports from organizations monitoring religious freedom, including Open Doors and our own Justice, Development and Peace Commission in Makurdi Diocese, have documented continuing attacks on Christian villages, especially in the Middle Belt states of Benue and Plateau, perpetrated by the Fulani militia. Thousands more have been. My own village of Aondana in Gwe West local government was attacked and several of my relatives killed on May 22nd, 2025. An entire convent of Reverend Sisters of the Clarisha Missionary was displaced, along with the local Catholic parish. Within the days following that attack, nearby villages like Naka also witnessed attacks. In fact, on the 24th May 2025, one of my priests, Father Solomon Atongu, was shot and left to die in the pool of his blood, while those traveling with him were abducted. Though he survived the attack, he is unable to walk freely because he has a broken bone. A few weeks before, on Palm Sunday, April 13, 2025, with the attack occurring late that night into the early hours of April 14th, Fulani militants launched a coordinated assault on Christian communities in Plateau State, Nigeria, primarily targeting the village of Zike in the Basa local government area near Jos. This incident was part of a broader wave of violence in the region during Holy Week, targeting Christians as they prepare to celebrate one of the most holy, important feasts in our church. In my own diocese of Makurdi, you are all familiar with the massacres of Saturday, 13th June in Yellowater, where 278 persons, men, women, and children were killed in a manner too gory to describe here by people shouting Allah Akbar, while slaughtering their victims. It took the prayers of the Holy Father Pope Leo XIV on Sunday, June 14th, for the government in Nigeria to even acknowledge this evil. Even so, the federal government still seeks to downplay the numbers and has yet to properly care for the survivors, even as I speak. Adoptions of clergy and laity remain rampant. Priests and pastors are prime targets for elimination. On 17th November 2025, another priest from Kaduna Archdiocese was kidnapped while his brother was shot dead and others taken into captivity. On the same day, a school was attacked in Kebbi State with many kidnapped, and the vice principal of the school was killed. Reports are also rife of the capture of a brigadier general of the Nigerian army with some army officers and soldiers by the Islamists. This is the daily experience of many Christians in Nigeria. Violence is spreading southward, displacing millions and destroying farmland, creating a humanitarian crisis compounded by food insecurity. Attacks by Fulani militants, Boko Haram, Islamic State of West African Province, ISWAP, have intensified not only in the Middle Belt and northern states, but spreading southward and targeting Christian communities with impunity. We hoped the CPC designation by President Trump at the end of October might stabilize the situation, but instead it is deteriorating into one of the most later periods of for Nigeria Christians in recent memory. Like it is now commonly acknowledged, Nigeria remains the deadliest place on earth to be a Christian. More believers are killed there annually than in the rest of the world combined. Yet, perpetrators face little accountability, and the Nigerian government's response since the CPC designation is to unleash vain glory speakers and willing tools to spin the narrative and make false equivalencies about Muslim deaths. But I would like to ask the question here, who is killing the Muslims up north? Is there any Christian militia displacing millions and occupying lands in Nigeria? The government of Nigeria's silence and refusal to engage in the face of continued killings and displacements has deepened feelings of abandonment among the people. The national leadership appears disengaged, treating the Christian genocide reports as a non-issue instead of considering it a national emergency. This lack of political will undermines trust in government institutions and fuels perceptions of complicity or indifference. Mr. Chairman, honorable members, allow me to briefly mention another point so close to my heart, the humanitarian and social impact of this genocide. In the Middle Belt alone, millions of internally displaced persons remain in camps, unable to return to their ancestral lands. This threatens cultural continuity, religious and economic survival. The psychological trauma of survivors of these attacks is immense, with little access to counseling or rehabilitation. Widows, orphans, and survivors face ongoing threats. Girls and women endure sexual violence as a weapon. So many others resort to unsafe coping mechanisms for daily sustenance, destroying families' guarantees that no more Christians will be born from so many traumatized women. This is one of the elements of genocide, securing the disappearance of a group by longer-term measures other than murder. Without quick intervention, Christianity risks elimination in parts of northern and middle belt Nigeria within a very short time. Let me put it on record here that on behalf of millions of Christians in Nigeria and in the diaspora, we want to thank President Donald J. Trump for his bold leadership in designating Nigeria as a CPC. I commend you, Mr. Chris Smith, and this subcommittee's ongoing leadership and the recent U.S. designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern. It is a vital step, but must be backed by serious action. 1, using the Magnitsky Act for targeted sanctions on Nigerian government officials and others tolerating or condoning Islamic violence in the country. Tie security and other development or humanitarian aid to measurable protection improvements. Expand humanitarian support for IDPs. The IDPs must return to their ancestral homes and lands with security guarantees by the Nigerian government. They must also be supported to rebuild their economic livelihoods and enjoy basic services such as education and sanitation. Support bills like the Nigerian Religious Freedom Accountability Act to hold perpetrators accountable. This point cannot be overemphasized because it is impunity that fuels the violence we suffer. Irrespective of who are being killed, the prime question is, are there killings in Nigeria? And the government should stop it. International advocacy, work with allies to praise Nigeria at the UN and ensure discriminatory laws and blasphemy laws are eradicated or expunged from the Constitution. Closing call to action. The CPC designation has brought immense joy, hope, and spiritual resilience to communities under siege in Nigeria. The Christian faith-based organizations remain among the few sources of relief and encouragement, filling the vacuum left by government inaction. However, the church alone cannot stop the killings. It requires coordinated political, military, and humanitarian intervention. Mr. Chairman and members, the blood of Nigerian Christians cries out to you people. We cannot afford to wait any longer. Renew hearings, pass binding legislations, and use every tool of U.S. influence to demand change. America remains the only country in the world with an International Religious Freedom Act. America has a unique role in defending religious freedom globally. Please enact concrete actions according to the CPC designation. We all know that inaction emboldens the extremists even more. Thank you for listening. I welcome you for this. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Bishop Adabe, thank you so very, very much for your testimony, for your leadership at great risk to yourself and so many of your priests and diocesan folks. I do thank you, and I wish you well on your trip, and I hope you make your plane. Thank you so very much. It now falls to me as a great honor to introduce our two witnesses from the administration, and they're on their way in right now. Okay. While we're waiting for them to be seated, I would ask. No, I got it. There you go. Good. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here. And let me introduce Ambassador Jonathan Pratt, who is the Senior Bureau Official for the Bureau of African Affairs. From January 2023 to 2025, he served as the Bureau's Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary. Prior to that, he was U.S. Ambassador to Djibouti from 2021 to 2023. He is a recipient of the Presidential Rank Award, a Distinguished Honor Award, the Director General's Award for Reporting, and the James Clement Dunn Award for Excellence, and he has spent a lifetime working very effectively on African issues. Thank you, Ambassador Pratt, for being here and testifying. Then we'll hear from Jake McGee, who joined the Department of State in April of 2025 as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Prior to joining the department, Mr. McGee was an attorney at the global law firm in Washington, D.C., and spent several years in the Middle East as an executive recruiter and taught English in a refugee camp in northern Jordan. Without objection, your full bios will be made a part of the record. Ambassador Pratt, the floor is yours.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Jacobs, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the administration's redesignation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern under the International Religious Freedom Act. In June of this year in Benue State, Nigeria, Fulani militants armed with guns and machetes set homes and food stores ablaze and locked families inside burning buildings, killing over 200 Christians. Witnesses reported assailants shouting Allahu Akbar as they assaulted St. Joseph's Church. The Fulani militants targeted Christian farmers, many of them internally displaced persons, already seeking refuge from previous violence. Benue State Governor Hyacinth Ali recently warned that his state is, quote, under siege and being attacked by terrorists and bandits, highlighting the Nigerian government's failure to intervene. The scale and brutality of violence facing Christian communities is tragic and unacceptable. It represents a serious failing on the part of the authorities. Similarly, on December 23, 2023, a series of coordinated attacks began and continued into Christmas morning in Plateau State. The attacks resulted in hundreds of victims. Many were women, children, and elderly unable to flee. At least 8 churches were destroyed. Plateau State communities are still reeling today from the overt religious-based violence of those attacks and their unanswered calls for help. The Nigerian government must do more to protect its Christian citizens who are being targeted and killed. Terrorists, separatists, bandits, and criminal militias in Nigeria wreak havoc throughout the country, with ongoing attacks often deliberately targeting Christian communities. In addition to the violent Islamic extremism and banditry experienced in Nigeria's Middle Belt, there has been a surge in violent attacks across northern Nigeria by violent extremist organizations like ISIS West Africa, ISIS Sahel, Boko Haram, Jainim, and Al-Qaeda affiliate Ansaru, and Lakurawa. The ongoing violence is a problem of prioritization for the government of Nigeria. Although its military and police are engaged and taking significant losses in their counterterrorism efforts in the Northeast, the Nigerian government has not done enough to effectively combat violence in the Middle Belt, protect Christian communities, or hold perpetrators accountable. The intent of the administration's approach is to raise the protection of Christians to the top of the government of Nigeria's priorities, especially in the Middle Belt. Nigeria is a key regional partner, Africa's largest democracy and most populous nation, with whom we share economic and security interests. It is in the United States' interest to work with the Nigerian government on a plan of action to strengthen security for at-risk Christian communities and Nigerians of all faiths whose ability to practice their faith is put in jeopardy by endemic violence and terrorism. We welcome Nigeria's willingness to cooperate following the CPC designation. We look forward to seeing these commitments put into action. The Trump administration is developing a plan to incentivize and compel the Nigerian government to better protect Christian communities and improve religious freedom. This plan will consider U.S. state and Treasury engagement on sanctions, as well as possible Department of War engagement on counterterrorism and other efforts to protect religious communities. Secretary Rubio and Deputy Secretary Landau have engaged already with members of the Nigerian government on the importance of addressing the violence facing Christians in the Middle Belt. Ultimately, the President's decision underscores the administration's commitment to promoting religious freedom as a universal right and a fundamental freedom. The levels of violence and atrocities committed against Christians and communities of all faiths in Nigeria are appalling and threaten this universal right. We remain open to working together with the Nigerians, but we also expect the Nigerian government to deliver results on the ground as proof of their commitment to this universal right. Thank you for your attention, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Ambassador, Mr. McGee.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Jacobs. I'll start over. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Jacobs, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to join my colleague, Senior Bureau Official Pratt, to discuss the Trump administration's decision to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern in accordance with the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. President Trump's decisive action to designate Nigeria as a CPC made clear that the United States stands ready to champion the rights of Christians and protect them from religious persecution. The religious freedom situation in Nigeria is well documented in the annual IRF reports. The IRF Act, designed by Congress nearly 3 decades ago, establishes religious freedom as a U.S. foreign policy priority and mandates that the president call out religious freedom violators as a reflection of the importance our nation places on America's first freedom. As my colleague stated, the levels of violence and atrocities committed against Christians in Nigeria are appalling. Particularly in the Middle Belt, these attacks directly target Christian populations. Ample witness testimonies have confirmed attackers used religious language during their attacks and specifically targeted Christians for killing, abduction, and rape. It is clear Nigerians are being attacked and killed because of their faith, and the Nigerian government must uphold its duty to protect them. The United States stands with civil society and religious actors brave enough to speak about the tragic violence and discrimination they face in Nigeria. When Bishop Wilfred Anagbe and Father Remigius Eyula testified before Chairman Smith's hearing last March about religious freedom, these two courageous religious leaders reported they received threats rather than protection from the Nigerian government. But the United States listened, and we will continue to listen and act until the Nigerian government protects religious freedom, strengthens its protections for vulnerable Christians, and holds perpetrators accountable. In addition to these failures, Nigerian officials also continue to prosecute individuals for alleged blasphemy, which stands in clear violation of Nigeria's obligation to safeguard free speech. Under the Sharia penal codes enforced in 12 of its states, Nigeria is one of only 8 countries in the world that allows for penalties up to execution for blasphemy, along with Iran and Pakistan, which have long been designated CPCs. When authorities detain individuals accused of blasphemy, the judicial process often takes years while they remain in prison, sometimes on death row. Mobs often take the law into their own hands with impunity. For example, in 2022, a mob killed Deborah Samuel Yakubu, a student of Shehu Shagari College of Education, Sokoto, in a heinous attack after she was accused of blasphemy. This young Christian woman's life was taken too soon, yet her murderers remain free. With horrifying reports of discrimination, abuse, torture, disappearance, and even the murder of individuals simply trying to practice their faith freely and safely, religious freedom is not an abstraction, but an obligation Nigeria must uphold. This administration has heard the steady, clarion call from civil society and religious actors about the pernicious impact of the violence on religious communities. The Nigerian government must protect religious freedom, strengthen protections of vulnerable Christians, hold perpetrators accountable, and make measurable progress toward ending this violence against Christians as well as any Nigerians persecuted for their faith. We greatly appreciate the committee's dedication to shedding light on the situation in Nigeria and support in advancing freedom, religious freedom, not just in Nigeria, but around the world. And I want to personally thank you, Chairman Smith, for your tireless efforts over the decades about religious freedom and, of course, other human rights abuses, including combating human trafficking. So thank you, Chairman Smith. I welcome your questions.
Thank you so very much for your testimonies. The phrase incentivize and compel, which you used, Ambassador Pratt, I think is an excellent one. Last night, and I know others met with the delegation that traveled here, and I know they're meeting with you and other at state. The head of National Security Advisor, Rabuda, and his delegation, including the Attorney General, I raised the very significant issue of CPC is not forever. You can get off of it, and everybody who gets put on CPC, or especially including on the trafficking laws, and I wrote them, Trafficking Victims Protection Act, I wrote that in the year 2000. And I have met with more delegations who always say, not us. That's, somebody else is doing the trafficking, it's not us. There's always this culture of denial. And that goes for states that are allies who get put on that list, and that includes CPC, and as well as countries that are not necessarily our allies, like China, which is both a Tier 3 country for trafficking and a CPC country, and has been from the very beginning of implementation of Frank Wolf's famous law, the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. So it's such a familiar refrain. And it flies in the face of evidence, and evidence is what it's all about. The prosecutorial discretion that is not shown in Nigeria to go after and to deploy detectives and protection capabilities from the police, it's just not there. We hear it so frequently, and if it is there, show us. They always say, well, they're bandits, they're this, they're that. But what's the motivation behind Boko Haram? And I went to my opening statement, or would remind you, I kept asking the administration then, why do you keep dismissing that this isn't a radical Islamist organization called Boko Haram? Yeah, they hate moderate Muslims too. I've heard that, like I said, from many imams myself, and they certainly hate Christians and will kill them to procure their ends. So I just, we need to have that in all human rights. I found that be the case. The author of 2 laws on religious freedom. I did the Frank Wolf bill in 2016, which put entities of particular concern, a lot of other things into the law, working with Frank, who is in retirement. Wolf, that champion for religious freedom. And I got to tell you, every time I talk to a delegation, every single time, they deny it. Every time. And after a while, it's like, what's your denial going to be? So last night when I was talking to this high-level delegation, I know some of my colleagues met with them as well, I said, we're just looking for progress. We're standing with your oppressed people. These Nigerians are not Americans. We do have a very large diaspora. They're wonderful, many in New Jersey. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about in the country, and we stand in solidarity with the oppressed and not the oppressor. And we wrote in the original Religious Freedom Act, and this is very important because they say, well, we're not killing people. We're not doing, well, engaged in or tolerated. Tolerated, when you don't prosecute, when you don't protect, that's toleration, and that's written right into the law as a criteria for designation of CPC. So I know that's what you've done, and I thank you for your due diligence on this. And there are a lot of other groups, left and right, and Amnesty International keeps saying, and I've raised this with the ICC. I've had ICC prosecutors testify at my hearings, particularly on Nagorno-Karabakh, when they were using food as a weapon. We're not signatories to it, but it's out there. Well, Nigeria is. And Amnesty, again, last year, they keep asking, where's the prosecutions for this? Nigeria, Amnesty International petitions the ICC judges to end prosecutors' delaying of justice for atrocity crimes. So are they wrong too? And I do hope that, and without objection, I would ask that article be made a part of the record about Amnesty. So it's very, very concerning, and I do hope that you will know that this is just par for the course. It's just not us, and it gets very, very tiresome. Show us that it's not you. Open it all up. How many of you, where are the prosecutions? We hear from so many Christians that they dial into the police and nobody shows up. And then there's no investigation. One of my sons is a detective. You've got to do detective work. Find out who it is and put them into jail if they're guilty. And that's not happening. They give some numbers. I remember with Nicholas Ceausescu, when I fought against the Securitate, we used to have people coming around this place saying, oh, he has no religious freedom issues. He allows churches. He was crushing the Jewish as well as the Christian communities through his Securitate, the secret police of Romania. So it's like we just keep seeing this reframe over and over again. So if you might want to comment on that, because again, my argument last night to that high-level delegation, we want you to succeed. We absolutely want you to rid yourself of this cancer that hates moderate Muslims and absolutely hates and kills as well Christians.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, as you and I discussed yesterday, the designation, we hope, will sharpen minds and sharpen attention to the issue. As you mentioned, there is a delegation already here now in Washington this week, a very senior delegation. They'll be meeting with the Deputy Secretary of State. They're meeting with Department of War officials as well. And the Secretary of State has directed us at the State Department to work with the Nigerian government on an action plan and to set up a task force to address this issue and use all of the tools that are at our disposal to focus minds and focus attention on this issue. Thank you.
As you mentioned, Chairman, this is not a new issue. This has been going on in Nigeria for several years. President Trump designated Nigeria in 2020, and the previous administration removed Nigeria as a CPC in 2021 and 2022 and 2023. And so a CPC designation, as my colleague just mentioned, focuses the minds of people in Nigeria. It puts the onus on the government of Nigeria to take action to protect its own citizens, including people of all faiths, not just Christians. Muslim communities are affected as well, other communities. And so the CPC designation is a step that starts a conversation that leads to greater engagement with the Nigerian government, because ultimately this is their responsibility.
Let me just, there is talk, while CPC is not a designation of genocide, there is a very cogent argument to be made that this is a genocide. And I remind people that, again, there's all this denial. I had 3 hearings on the Armenian genocide, and I had sitting right where you're sitting, Mr. McGee, an ambassador from Turkey, who said, if you recognize, and we had a good bipartisan effort going on this, if you recognize the so-called Armenian genocide, we'll throw you out of your base in Incirlik. And I said, what a great NATO partner you are. It was just amazing. We've seen it over and over again. When I went to Darfur and met with Bashir, we then went to the UN, Human Rights Commission, as it was called then, not the Council. We were flabbergasted that they wouldn't call what was happening in Darfur a genocide. And again, I remind everybody, Article 2 says genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, in whole or in part. It's very clear. Now, we're not talking in CPC about genocide, but when we fought against ISIS, and Jeff Fortenberry did a very serious bill because the administration then would not recognize what ISIS was doing to the Chaldeans, and I went and visited with them in that part of the world. I was shocked that they wouldn't do it. We got a bipartisan piece of legislation passed that did recognize the genocide, and then finally John Kerry said, "Okay, we'll call it what it is." So, whole or in part. And that's what's happening here, at least in part. And the president did say he's worried about the extermination if it's allowed to continue onward. So I would like to ask, just for the record, the department has 7 positions vacant in our embassy in Nigeria, including individual rights, religious freedom reports, and the like. I just encourage you to fill those as quickly as possible. I think that would be very helpful if you could. And I yield to Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as I noted in my opening remarks, a recent DevX article described a former program from Search for Common Ground that Secretary Rubio terminated earlier this year. This program set up critical early warning systems in communities in Yelwada, a predominantly Christian region in Nigeria's Middle Belt, that actually worked in decreasing instances of violence and deaths. In June, this same community experienced an attack, but without that early warning system. Nearly 200 people died and 4,000 people fled their homes. Security forces arrived long after the attackers left. And had this program still been in place, it could have prevented some of these deaths by sending early warning signs ahead of the attack and taking actions to prevent or respond to it. Mr. McGee, this program was funded by your bureau, the Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor Bureau. Can you explain to the committee why the department canceled this program?
Thank you for your question, Ranking Member Jacobs. As Secretary Rubio has said time and again, America is the most generous country in the world, and we will continue to be the most generous country in the world. We are looking at every option to stop this atrocious violence, but ultimately the violence must be stopped by the Nigerian government.
Okay,
in terms of programming,
will you recommend restarting this program to the Secretary?
So to your question, Ranking Member Jacobs, we do have ongoing program, including early warning and early response systems that are effective across the Middle Belt, and they have saved lives. And so we have a lot of tools at our disposal in DRL and across the State Department that is not just assistance, but is security, that is economic engagement. Across the State Department, we're reviewing every single tool that we have to make sure that this violence stops. But ultimately, America can partner with the Nigerian government, but the Nigerian government must take responsibility and protect religious freedom for all communities, especially Christians right now who are suffering disproportionately.
So my understanding is that most of those programs have been canceled, but I look forward to hearing from you which of those programs have continued to be funded and which you intend to restart. Earlier this month, President Trump posted on Truth Social threatening to cut off all aid to Nigeria and go into the country, quote, guns a-blazing, to, quote, completely wipe out terrorists. He ordered Secretary Hegseth to prepare for possible actions. To
your question, Ranking Member Jacobs, we do have ongoing program, including early warning and early response systems that are effective across the Middle Belt, and they have saved lives. And so we have a lot of tools at our disposal in DRL and across the State Department that is not just assistance, but is security, that is economic engagement. Across the State Department, we're reviewing every single tool that we have to make sure that this violence stops. But ultimately, America can partner with the Nigerian government, but the Nigerian government must take responsibility and protect religious freedom for all communities, especially Christians right now who are suffering disproportionately.
So my understanding is that most of those programs have been canceled, but I look forward to hearing from you which of those programs have continued to be funded and which you intend to restart. Earlier this month, President Trump posted on Truth Social threatening to cut off all aid to Nigeria and go into the country, quote, guns a-blazing, to, quote, completely wipe out terrorists. He ordered Secretary Hegseth to prepare for possible actions. This reckless threat provoked calls within the Nigerian government and public to respect Nigeria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Ambassador Pratt, what role has Secretary Rubio been given to respond to this challenge using diplomatic and development tools?
Thank you for the question. The Secretary of State, as I mentioned, has directed us to come up with a comprehensive plan using all of the tools that are at our disposal, primarily diplomatic, but also security, also assistance, cooperation programs. This would span from security to policing to economic. We want to look at all of these tools and have a comprehensive strategy to get the best result possible.
Great. We will look forward to seeing that strategy. There were public reports that AFRICOM has laid out 3 potential military options. What is the status of this decision at an interagency level?
We have had interagency discussions about all of the tools that are at our disposal, including on the security side of the equation, and we have a live discussion with the Nigerian government about how we can assist them in responding to security threats in the country, including this one.
Have there been any NSC meetings on this issue?
There have.
Okay. And I want to turn to another program that I raised during my remarks, the Community Initiatives to Promote Peace. Again, this one incredibly successful, saw positive results showing that only 10% of people who received this training experienced violence in their communities compared to 41% of people who didn't. This is an extremely low-cost, effective intervention, and yet again, this program was eliminated. Mr. McGee, can you help the committee understand why this program wasn't deemed worthwhile to continue?
So again, the programming that I mentioned that we still have continuing in the Middle Belt, the early warning, early response, also includes dialogue amongst religious communities. And we have seen effective dialogue between those communities that do promote religious tolerance, addressing some of the root causes that you mentioned earlier. And so we're committed to continue to provide support to the Nigerian government. That obviously programming doesn't go to the Nigerian government. It goes to locally owned and locally managed programming opportunities. And so we're still doing that programming, and we're committed to use every tool at our disposal to help the Nigerian government take care of this issue.
Thank you. The State Department still has not submitted the annual International Religious Freedom Report that is statutorily required by May of this year. It's November. This committee has not seen this administration's analysis, therefore, of the situation in Nigeria or actions taken in support of religious freedom. Mr. McGee, when will we see this report? When will the State Department submit it?
So as you mentioned, Ranking Member Jacobs, the IRF reports are a valuable tool to give an overview of religious freedom in every country around the world and to tell the Nigerian government steps they can take and the situation on the ground. So we're working on those and will be released soon. There's also, of course, the human rights reports that have been released that are a snapshot or an overview of the human rights condition in every country around the world, 198 countries and territories. And so we're committed to releasing the IRF reports as soon as they're ready.
Okay, great. In mid-October, Senior Advisor Boulos stated that Boko Haram and ISIS are killing more Muslims than Christians. What is the State Department's assessment? Have these groups killed more Muslims or Christians? And what evidence is the State Department citing that Christians in Nigeria are at specific grave risk of atrocities?
So President Trump has made clear that we are to respect and promote religious freedom for all communities. In Nigeria, there is a particular problem of targeting of Christians, and they have suffered a disproportionate number of killings compared to their population, especially in the Middle Belt. And when we see attackers chanting religious slogans, churches being destroyed to the tune of thousands over the last several years, thousands of Christians being killed, and particular targeting on Christian holidays like Christmas and Easter and other holidays. This shows there's a religious component targeted towards Christians in particular. That being said, we stand with all communities around the world who are suffering religious persecution because of their faith. We value religious freedom as a per se good, and we're committed to protect religious communities no matter where they are. As I think Chairman Smith mentioned in his remarks, of the thousands of Christians who've been killed this year around the world, the vast majority have been killed in Nigeria, which is a problem the government of Nigeria must take seriously.
Okay. I disagree with your assessment, but I look forward to seeing the report that has it all laid out. Last question, Ambassador Pratt. Yesterday, President Trump announced this administration would start focusing on trying to end the war in Sudan. This is a welcome development, and I hope you all are successful. I am, however, concerned that the sporadic high-level attention without the appropriate staff at the working level will not be enough to bring a sustained end to the war or transition to a real peace process that includes Sudanese civilians. Could you share more about the State Department's strategy to bring the war in Sudan to an end? How many people on your team are dedicated to this portfolio? Has there been an NAC meeting about this recently? Will there be shortly? How can we be sure that this will be a sustained approach?
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Jacobs. I'm very proud to have fought very hard to retain all of the staff in the Africa Bureau during the recent reorganization that the State Department undertook. We were able to present very convincing data about the understaffing historically in the Bureau. And so not only did we retain staff, we also gained additional staff to help on the assistance side. On Sudan, we retain a very large office by State Department standards focused on Sudan, and we are very lucky to have Senior Advisor Boulos, who has brought high-level White House attention to two key issues for us, which is Eastern DRC, as you know, and Sudan. Senior Advisor Boulos has also worked on other issues to bring profile and attention to them. And so we welcome the President's comments and profile in his meetings with the Saudi leader yesterday to draw attention and resources to this issue.
Okay. Listen, I know you all are doing what you can. AF is mostly intact. Staff bandwidth is still limited by USAID cuts at embassy and the cut to the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations that I know was working hard on this issue. And the administration has yet to name a special envoy for Sudan. So I look forward to continuing this conversation to make sure that you all have what you need to be successful in this endeavor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Baird.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here. My question deals with the responsibility, and we've heard a lot about that already, of the Nigerian government for putting an end to this prosecution or persecution. So has the United States really been able to see any progress in terms of the Nigerian government recognizing a duty on its part to reduce this persecution and targeted violence? And to what extent, if any, has the government's accountability made any improvement in reducing these persecutions?
So as I mentioned in my opening statement, thank you for your question, Representative Baird. The Nigerian government has to do more. There have been attacks where 0 perpetrators have been held to account and 0 prosecutions. Heinous attacks that cost lives, that drive people out of their homes. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of internally displaced peoples, and those individuals who caused that displacement have not been held to account. So as SBO Pratt mentioned, we're having high-level engagement with the Nigerian government. We have a great partnership on a lot of issues like security, trade, other things, but we're encouraging them to actually take ownership of this responsibility and prosecute the criminals and terrorists who have perpetrated this persecution.
So do you feel like there's any movement on the part of the government, Nigerian government, to do that, to move to protect their people? I mean, I just wanted a hint of whether they're moving that direction or not. So
I think President Trump took bold action in redesignating Nigeria as a CPC, and that, I believe, has gotten the attention of the Nigerian government. We're engaged in high-level dialogues with them, including this week at the very highest levels. We're planning engagement on the ground, both through our embassy there and other trips, to make sure that Nigerians hear our very important message that they have to do better. So I think we're making progress in the right direction. President Trump's bold action on the CPC designation was an important step. It's gotten their attention in the Nigerian government, but we need to do a lot more.
So, Mr. Pratt, I want to delve a little deeper into that CPC designation that he just mentioned. And you know, the Trump's administration was designated Nigeria as a CPC. So do you anticipate the administration will be less likely to issue a waiver in the current administration as opposed to President Trump's first term? And if the president does not issue a waiver this time, do you think that the lack of a waiver now will apply to the necessary pressure to the government to reduce these persecutions?
Thank you very much. We are putting together, as I mentioned, a comprehensive plan to use all the tools available. And so I expect, as we're cooperating with the government of Nigeria on what those tools will be, if there is specific U.S. government programs or assistance that will require a waiver, and through agreement in our cooperative relationship with the government of Nigeria on what will be effective and successful, that we may need to seek waivers for some programs. There may be other programs that we will not seek waivers for.
Thank you. Mr. McGee, do you have any comments in that regard?
I would just echo what SBO Pratt has said, that we're engaged in high levels, and if waivers are needed for certain programs, we're willing to do that. But the important thing is to get the Nigerian government's attention, including about the Sharia law that still exists in 12 northern states, up to and including the death penalty as a device of punishment. And so we're having frank conversations with Nigerians at all levels of government and are committed to do whatever it takes to continue to encourage them to take actual action and not just talk.
So I thank both of you for being here, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank you very much. Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for being here this morning. And before we turn to Nigeria, since this is the first time we have you in front of us, in front of the committee, I just want to quickly talk about Sudan, because I do think this is so critical. And the humanitarian situation there, the incredible numbers. I mean, 400,000 killed, over 11 million displaced, 30 million in need of humanitarian aid. This is just a stunning crisis, and I did want to appreciate the administration's recent comments on this, particularly Secretary Rubio, when he called for action to cut off the supply of weapons to the Rapid Support Forces. And as the Secretary had previously acknowledged, it has been widely documented that the UAE has been one of the primary drivers in fueling those weapons to the RSF. So I hope that I want to urge the administration to use every piece of leverage that we have to halt that support. And I hope, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your leadership and for the ranking member's leadership on this issue. I hope that we can take up the bill from Representative Meeks and Representative Jacobs. I know it was on our agenda, but I think it's important for us to take up that bill at the earliest opportunity, because this is a moment for us, I think, to all focus on the horrific crisis there. So just want to urge you to do everything you can, and we are spending a lot of time on this issue. I have a lot of constituents who are directly impacted by this in the Sudanese diaspora. So thank you for that. The devastating levels of violence in Nigeria are clear, but I appreciate that people have also recognized it isn't just the persecution of Christians. This is persecution of multiple groups, and I think we have to be careful not to portray it just as persecution of Christians. That feels to me simplistic, and it doesn't account for the intersectional diversity of Nigeria. Certainly religion is a contributing factor to the violence, but a review by the Search for Common Ground found that in Nigeria's Middle Belt region, religion was not a primary driver of conflict. Instead, violence has been directed against both Christians and Muslims, regardless of religion, at the hands of armed terror groups like Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa, or fueled by differences in lifestyle between farmer and herder groups, compounded by climate change and governance issues. And so I want to start by saying I'm very concerned that a day after President Trump saw a clip on Fox News about the persecution of Christians in Nigeria, he threatened to go, quote, guns a-blazing in Nigeria and revoke all assistance. That would include all global health funding, despite Nigeria accounting for over a quarter of annual malaria deaths a year. And being home to the world's third largest population living with HIV. These are all issues I worked on in Africa long before coming to Congress. In response, the Nigerian government criticized any action that would violate Nigeria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. I know, Ambassador Pratt, that you've spoken about some agreements, some conversations in a task force with the Nigerian government, but can you tell me under what authority would the U.S. military strike inside of Nigeria?
Well, the Secretary of State, and thank you for the question, Congresswoman. The Secretary of State has directed us to put together a comprehensive plan that uses all tools at our disposal, including security and Department of War. And this would be primarily focused on the security that we are providing to the government of Nigeria and how they are deploying their assets. We can also share information and intelligence. We can talk about counterterrorism. And so those are the tools that we are primarily looking at in our strategy.
Don't you think it would have been appropriate to have the task force discussion and the alternatives presented prior to the president going on Truth Social and saying we're going to go guns a-blazing into Nigeria?
We've been working on these problem sets in Nigeria for a long time. We have a lot of programs of assistance in the country. They did undergo a foreign assistance review, but many of them continue, and we want to make sure that we're using them strategically to get the best outcomes.
Very diplomatically said, Ambassador. I just wish we would actually stick to that playbook rather than a bully and threaten of a country that is extremely important to us and to the region. I don't think that's the right way to go, to just go on Truth Social and threaten guns a-blazing. I think what you've described is much more appropriate, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of that. You know, we had Ambassador Kelly Curry here before a different subcommittee of this committee, former Trump appointee. And she said in front of the committee in a hearing yesterday, I think it's a very relevant quote, "You cannot solve problems created by men with guns by turning to men with guns for the solution." And I just would urge us to think about that. This is coming from a former Trump appointee. I think if we were to do this, it would just serve to further radicalize communities and risk turning the aggression of actors like Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa directly to the United States. I just have 50.
Gentlelady has expired.
Oh, it's expired. I'm so sorry. I thought I had 50 seconds left. Thank you for your indulgence. I yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Huizenga.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. And I'm going to deviate a little bit from my written remarks, much to the chagrin of my staff, but I feel it needs to be addressed right from the very beginning. The simple fact is radicalized Islamists are running amok in Nigeria. They're terrorizing moderate Muslims. They're terrorizing Christians. And they are targeting Christians. That cannot be disputed. And while we see many people trying to emphasize the outside issues, lifestyle, who owns land, who is the herder, et cetera, they want to emphasize that those are the key drivers and that they're the key drivers of everything but religion. And I and many others, and I'm not just talking about those of us on this committee or Americans, I'm talking about religious leaders in Nigeria believe religion is one of, if not the main driver of targeted violence right now. We just heard from Bishop Anagbe. A week and a half ago, I talked to President Magaji. President Magaji is the president of my own, he's the Nigerian president of my own faith sect, the Christian Reformed Church. We have 400,000, mostly from a Dutch background, 400,000 participants and members here in North America between the United States and Canada. We have 500,000 in Nigeria. We are essentially an African church that happens to be headquartered in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I want to ask this question, because this seems to be sort of part of the central argument. Well, this isn't necessary. Well, certainly the Trump administration believed it was necessary the first go around. And I want to ask this question. Did things improve when the Biden administration removed the CPC?
Thank you for your question, Representative Huizenga.
And just for the record, I'm seeing a number of heads shaking no in the right behind you. And these are people that may have a little better information than what the American media is, and they're all nodding their head right now. So go ahead.
Thank you for your question, Representative Huizenga. As you mentioned, violence has increased over the last several years. It was unfortunate that the Biden administration chose to remove Nigeria as a CPC in 2021 and 2022 and 2023. And President Trump's bold action to redesignate them is a wake-up call to the Nigerian government. And as you mentioned, extremist religious ideology is, of course, a primary motivator of these attacks. The attackers themselves use religious language. They target churches. They target Christians on holidays.
And absolutely. It was Christmas Eve of 2023 exactly. When 200 people were killed in a church. Now, I want to ask this. So one question was, did things improve? I think the answer is no on that. Here's the question. Proportionally, do we see Christians killing Muslims in Christian areas of Nigeria the way that we are seeing radicalized Islamists killing Christians in Muslim areas of Nigeria?
What I can tell you, Representative Huizenga, is that Christians are disproportionately targeted based on their population.
Exactly. And by the way, for those that you can't pick up with the microphones, there's audible yeses behind you. Again, the people that are watching who are nodding their heads. Why? Because they have lived this. Their families have lived this. I went to school with kids from Nigeria. I've got neighbors who've been missionaries there, who have family there, who have friends there, who know this is going on. Yet we've got not just the mass media, we got people within Congress denying that this is happening. or certainly de-emphasizing it. It ought to be outrageous that it is Christians, moderate Muslims, anyone being terrorized by these radicalized Islamists in Nigeria, and we've got the Tinubu government sitting back and not doing enough. And I recently just was interviewed by Nigerian television, Arise TV, and that was really their question. Is the Tinubu government doing enough? And I had to answer, no, they are not. And I do not understand how a delegation can come here to the United States and downplay and come up with all of these other excuses as to why this is allowed to happen. It should be rejected and should be called out for what it is. And I've got a couple of other questions that my time has expired that I'm going to have to go and ask for them in written responses. But one of them I need to highlight is in Benue State, there's 1.4 million people who are considered internally displaced. Understanding that the administration has supported refugee assistance in dozens of other countries since taking office, what humanitarian assistance support are you providing or plan to provide to the IDPs in Benue and Taraba states, where many of those Christian communities reside? And I'll have to take the answer in writing. And Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, just to show the breadth of this, I want to submit for the record remarks from the chairman of the Financial Services Committee, French Hill from Arkansas, who also serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, the Intel Committee. And I serve as vice chair of the Committee of Financial Services. This is where many of those sanctions originate and the enforcement. And I will say this, sanctions are only as good as your willingness to enforce them. And as the chairman has pointed out, there are ways to get out of those sanctions. And that's through correct your behavior. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit the letter. Thank you. And with that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Thank you, Ranking Member Jacobs, and the distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for convening this critical hearing. The crisis in Nigeria demands our clear-eyed attention, not political exploitation. I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists that have taken the time to come before us today. Thank you for your work on Africa on the ground, and at least one of you brings that experience. However, I must express my shock and, if you will, a bit of outrage that we are not putting into these top positions people who are directly from and represent the culture and the lived experiences of the African people. Currently, we still have unfulfilled positions that are very important, which demonstrates this administration's lack of sincerity towards moving us towards more dialogue as opposed to destruction. The Assistant Secretary for African Affairs has not been appointed or even nominated. The Senior Director for Africa at the NSC has not been appointed or directed for Middle East and African Affairs. I've had the honor of traveling to Nigeria now for 4 decades and meeting with Nigerians in the diaspora for decades as well. They are unequivocally some of the most tolerant, productive, and loving people that you will ever meet. We are speaking today about a nation of extraordinary promise and complexity, a country of nearly 240 million people, home to 250 ethnic groups and 2 major religions, Christianity and Islam, that have coexisted and built a society together for generations. The idea that this nation is simply engaged in a one-sided religious war, I believe, is a dangerous fiction. The current government, led by President Tinubu, a Muslim married to an ordained Christian minister, reflects this complexity. Out of the 9 top security chiefs, 5 are Christians, including the Chief of Defense Staff and the head of the Air Force. Nigeria is a diverse, complex democracy, and we must treat it as such. The suffering in Nigeria is immense. The insecurity is a major issue for all Nigerians. We must stand firmly with every victim and survivor. Violence against any person of faith is unacceptable. With approximately 8,000 civilians of all faiths killed so far this year, the pain felt by Christians and Muslim communities alike deserve our compassion and, again, not our exploitation. The truth is that Nigeria's wave of violence stems from a complex mix of ethnic, economic, external, and religious tensions. Boko Haram and other extremist groups have killed both Christians and Muslims indiscriminately. Communities across Nigeria, from farmers in Plateau State to herders in the north, have suffered unspeakable, staggering losses. To simplify this tragedy by calling it solely a Christian genocide, I believe ignores the full, difficult truth and the suffering of all Nigerians. Therefore, the answer, I believe, is not and will never be American bombs or boots on the ground. We have not given diplomacy an exhaustive chance. I have previously denounced the threat to deploy U.S. troops to Nigeria, calling it a dangerous overreach that risks reigniting colonial-era patterns of intervention on the African continent. We cannot allow the sudden interest in Nigeria's internal conflict to be a pretext for military action, when this same impulse was absent in the Sudan, in the DRC, or the Central African Republic. Furthermore, we must address the sheer hypocrisy of a military-first approach when non-military support has been repeatedly undermined. As the New York Times' Nicholas Kristof has rightly stated, Trump aid cuts kill more Christians than jihadists. Deep cuts to the USAID program and global food and health programs have severely limited America's ability to provide the kind of non-military support that was estimated to be saving the lives of more than 250,000 Nigerians each year. When you defund USAID and shut down peace-building initiatives, you leave communities vulnerable. You don't stabilize Africa with missiles. You stabilize it with schools, with clean water, with economic opportunity, with true partnership. The path to peace in Nigeria must come through dialogue, development, and dignity, not denomination. America should be a partner in healing, not a hammer looking for a nail. I urge this subcommittee to prioritize a diplomacy-first approach, fully fund our humanitarian aid and peace-building initiatives, and work with the Nigerian government to eliminate terrorist, criminal groups, securing a safer and more stable future for all Nigerians. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the testimony. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Who's next? Mr. Fine. The chair recognizes Mr. Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to participate today. You know, as I thought about what I would talk about today, I thought of a flag that I saw flown on October 7th, 2023. It said, "First we come for the Saturday people, tomorrow we come for the Sunday people." And as we have this hearing today, I ask myself, how many countries are we going to allow this to happen in until we take it seriously? On October 7th, 2023, people yelling Allahu Akbar attempted to genocide the Jews. A few months ago, people yelling Allahu Akbar attempted to genocide the Druze in Syria. And here we are talking today about another group of people yelling Allahu Akbar trying to genocide Christians. How many countries are we going to have this happen to? How often are we going to allow this to be whitewashed and both siderists until we acknowledge that we have a serious problem that we have out there? You know, I want to thank President Trump for doing this. Joe Biden never should have done it. And my question when I get to it will be, why do you think he did? Why do you think he took them off the list? But I want to thank President Trump for taking a leadership role, because we must stomp out this evil wherever it presents itself. I want to thank the chairman for choosing to have a hearing on this. And I want to thank my colleague, my fellow freshman, Representative Moore, for also raising the profile of this issue around the world. It is easy for me to criticize this when it happens in Israel and when it happens with the Jews, given who I am. But it is important that we call out evil wherever it is. And I am sick and tired of the fetishism and the whitewashing of the problem. This is a real problem that we have to acknowledge in a country where you can get the death penalty for criticizing a religion. And we'll talk about that if I have time to get to questions. That is not okay. That is not acceptable. That is not a value that America should ever stand by and allow. We are allowed to have whatever opinions we want in this country, no matter how reprehensible they may be. We should demand that from others if they wish for our aid and assistance. But what I'm most tired of is the delusional belief that if we all just sit down around some sort of hypothetical drum circle, as I heard earlier, that we can resolve our differences. People are being killed, and it requires people to stand up and use force to keep them and to make them safe. I'd like to ask the ambassador, since 2009, it's believed 19,000 Christian churches have been destroyed. My question to you is, was that a coincidence? Were they just like randomly targeting buildings, and these 19,000 buildings happened to be churches, or were they targeted because they were churches?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. As my colleague has said, and the Trump administration strongly believes that there has been a disproportionate number of attacks on Christian communities, which is the reason for the designation.
Okay. And so let me follow up with this. Why do you think Joe Biden decided, given this was going on, we're all good, we're taking this away, everything's going to be fine now? What led to this delusional strategy that led to the deaths of Christian people?
I can't speak to that decision.
What do you think?
I would say that there was probably a discussion around strategic interests, but the performance did not achieve the result intended, which is why this administration has made a decision that we need to see more performance in this area in terms of security for all Nigerians, but especially to tackle this particular problem.
Okay. I'd like to ask Mr. McGee a question. What is the administration's position, and how strongly have you encouraged the Nigerian government as it relates to blasphemy laws? You know, this idea, you talked about problems that people are having there. They go to jail for years because of their words, because of their criticism. Not saying I agree with their criticism all the time, but all they're doing is they're not threatening anyone, they're not killing anyone, but somehow they go to jail for blasphemy, something unfortunately many people moving to this country want to impose on us here. What has the administration done to say to that, that's not okay, we're not going to abide by that?
So it is unacceptable in a free and democratic society to have blasphemy laws, period. They are not only imposing on somebody's free speech, but they're also imposing on their right to practice their own religion freely. And when blasphemy laws are used as a tool by the mob, or bandits, whatever you want to call them, to attack Christians, it shows that blasphemy laws are a problem per se. It's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons why the Trump administration opposes these laws, and it's one of the reasons why Nigeria is on the CPC list, because these Sharia laws are being used as a bludgeon against Christians oftentimes.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here, and I will close by thanking President Trump for being willing to go after Muslim terror wherever it rears its ugly head around the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Fine. Dr. McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having this hearing. Africa is an area of particular concern to myself, a person who's been deployed there a couple times on Marine Expeditionary Units, seen some horrible things. It was interesting to me when one of the caucuses here in this august House claimed that President Bush waited too long to go into a certain country to secure the capital of Liberia after a presidential exile because he didn't give a damn about Africans. Meanwhile, we stood by during the Clinton administration in '94 when I was in Entebbe, Uganda, waiting to go into Rwanda, while about 1 million people were killed in very similar fashion to what's happening right now. People are being hacked to death with machetes. I've seen some very graphic things on what's going on right now. People literally being dismembered by machetes. People digging their own graves and literally being just summarily executed. And yet the right thing to do is to continue with the diplomacy that's resulted in this all along to take them off the CPC. And this idea that this ever went away is ridiculous. We're right now considering selling arms to them, one of the most advanced attack helicopters, the AH-1 Whiskey, the Viper, or actually it's the Zulu. I'm very concerned with how that's going to be deployed and against whom. We've seen the integration of very, very radical people inside of the government agencies themselves. And we've seen this in Afghanistan. When I was in Afghanistan, we saw the same thing, where the bad actors actually get inside of the government agencies and turn upon their own people. Very concerning. We saw Tigran Gambarian, one of my constituents, taken hostage by the Nigerian government and held hostage for several months because of some business dispute they had with somebody in America. Bad acting on the Nigerian government's behalf. Now, you talked about, I'm going to quote you on high-level things, Mr. McGee, high-level meetings, what the next step would be, a lot more. But I'm asking for specifics at this point, because I've never seen generalities ever result in anything that's been of consequence. What can we do on the by an international community, whether it be from the trans nation in Africa or through the international community, through the UN, which I've seen be highly ineffective in the past, but what can we do of quantity and quality that's actually going to make a difference in Africa, because we haven't been doing it? What specifically, not generalities? Can you give me those answers between the two of you?
Sir, just a clarification, please. Across all of Africa or specifically in Nigeria?
Specifically in Nigeria, but all of Africa can actually contribute to solving this problem. We can use several countries to help us out with this. We don't have to be the only force to be.
Development and commercial investment in the continent can yield the best dividends, which is one of the reasons why this administration has focused so heavily on our commercial strategy in Africa. We rewrote the strategy, and we've focused very heavily on delivering U.S. companies to the continent, because we believe that they offer the best in terms of quality and can bring the most development. And it also delivers for the United States. We've focused very heavily on security, and AFRICOM has engaged heavily across the continent. So security is very important. Law enforcement is a very important piece of that as well. And so I'd say, as you look across the continent, the number one priority that I would place, because it lifts all boats, is the economic piece, and I'd focus on commercial.
So the AFRICOM commander is a Marine, four-star, good friend of mine, and I understand what his limitations have been. You know, obviously, we don't want to be, if you're not invited into a country, it makes it much more difficult. I've seen the leverage we have economically, but I'm worried also about pushing them into Chinese arms, which they're ready and waiting to pilfer that country and its resources. What about how we deal with the international community coming in there and stabilizing it in a military fashion so that we can actually stop the violence? Because it doesn't seem like the government's being effective in that at all.
The new AFRICOM commander, General Anderson, it's good to hear that he's a colleague of yours, is highly capable, as you know, Special Forces. He's brought a lot of focus to the continent and how he would like to work with African governments, including Nigeria, on sharing information and on achieving better outcomes on the security side of the equation. And so he's been very, very engaged, and I believe will achieve results in terms of security on the continent.
Okay, I'm just going to once again get back to the senator point that wasn't really addressed, but I hope is addressed. Yes, we need that financial leverage on them, and I think they will pay attention to that. We have their attention, but it's not finishing the race. We need to bring the international community on board to solve this in very tangible assets, because the violence is real, it's not stopping, and Nigeria does not seem to be taking this seriously. Thank you. With that, I yield.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCormick. Mr. Oshatsky.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member Jacobs, and to all our witnesses. Ambassador Pratt, thank you for your many years of service to our country. I'll just open by saying I am a man of deep faith. Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. I have no problem sharing that. I am also troubled by the state of religious freedom in Nigeria and around the world. So I want to be clear up front, violence against Christians in Nigeria is a serious issue. Christians are being massacred and communities are living in constant fear. But this suffering is not just confined to one religious group. Masad Boulos, President Trump's own senior advisor for Africa, recently said, quote, "People are suffering from all sorts of backgrounds. This is not specifically targeted at one group or other. Terrorism has no color and no religion and no tribe, President Trump's own senior advisor. Muslims and Christians alike have lived under the constant threat of extremist groups like Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa for far too long. And so the real story here for me is not about Nigeria's intent at the institutional level to persecute people based on faith. Instead, it's really an issue of capacity. The Nigerian government lacks the means to protect communities against groups that kill indiscriminately. To be clear, this does not abdicate the Nigerian government from responsibility. A government's duty is to protect its people. And when there's a failure to do so, whether that's neglect or corruption or governance, leaders must be held accountable. But capacity within Nigerian institutions maintain peace is a real question. And we should be asking what the U.S. is doing to help Nigeria build that capacity. Are we offering real partnerships or just threatening airstrikes and sanctions? Or instead, are we thinking about technical support, training, and investment in the institutions that prevent violence in the first place? So let's work together to fix what is broken. And I appreciate the ranking member for opening up this hearing with additional support options. And I want to thank, again, the chairman for convening this. On the issue of capacity, Ambassador Pratt, you've said that Nigeria needs to do more. If they don't have the capacity to do more, we should help with that. And so I want to know, I guess my question there is, does the State Department assess that the Nigerian government has the capacity to protect Christians and other religious groups from extremist violence?
Nigeria is a very wealthy country, very populous country. We believe that this is a question of focus. There is a security problem in Nigeria, a very serious one, that we are trying to help the country address. And we have brought tools to the table in terms of U.S. programs and assistance. In particular, on the issue we're discussing today, we would like to see more focus on that particular issue, in addition to addressing the larger security question that you referred to.
Okay, I look forward to working with you on that. One other issue that's important to me is youth and youth development. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom's 2025 annual report recommended broad support for Nigerian civil society organizations. The U.S. has historically done that. A State Department-funded program in northeast Nigeria called Nigerian Youth Care brought together Christian and Muslim youth leaders to promote dialogue between those two communities. These programs provided Nigerian youth with mentorship and training on how to bridge religious divides. Unfortunately, that program was disrupted for months because of stop work orders, and the State Department did not grant the implementer an extension of the project at the end of the fiscal year. To either the ambassador or Mr. McGee, can you explain why this project did not receive a no-cost extension at the end of the year? And would you recommend to the Secretary to reinstitute this program to reduce violence and promote that interfaith dialogue?
Thank you for your question, Representative. As I said earlier, the United States is by far the most generous country with our foreign aid, and we plan to still be the most generous country with our foreign aid, as Secretary Rubio has said. So some programming you mentioned, we actually have ongoing programming in my bureau that leads to early warning, early response systems that also includes dialogue between religious communities. As many members have stated, this is a complex problem. It's not one that can be addressed with one neat solution. There are, of course, like every human action, multiple drivers of this persecution, and there are multiple communities being affected, not just Christians, as you mentioned. Yeah. But we must tell the truth. That begins an honest relationship with Nigerians is to tell them that a lot of this violence is driven by religion, religious persecution, religious extremist ideology. And so in terms of programming, we're committed to the programming that we have on the ground that is effective. It's saving lives, and we are reviewing every foreign assistance dollar at the State Department to make sure that taxpayer dollars are used effectively and actually helps people on the ground.
That's great. I thank you both for your time and your testimony today. I look forward to following up on those programs with you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
I'd like to now recognize Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Smith, for convening this hearing. And I just want to recognize real quick the tremendous impact that Chairman Smith has had in this realm of human rights, Christian persecution over the decades. I'm a former staff member, actually, of this committee. I worked on this committee when Chairman Smith was on this committee. He had a very large impact on me as a staff member, and to come full circle back around and be on a hearing on such an issue that was really inspired by Chairman Smith's work here when I was a staff member. Thank you for that. And but I think one of the things that's, and I would say disheartening in this, hearing some of the media reporting and frankly some of my colleagues on the other side of the dais here, is this misdirection of what is happening. There is a persecution of Christians in Nigeria. The witnesses have made that clear. We heard the bishop speak. I don't know how many times we have to hear it or how many reports of martyred Christians, my brothers and sisters in Christ in Nigeria, how many times we have to hear that happen to take it seriously. And one of the things that concerns me is that it feels like at times it's echoing an indifference around this, and somehow we're going to develop our way out of it through developmental programs, and this indifference sounds like echoes of Rwanda to me, where we did nothing on that. And I think, as you remember quite clearly, President Clinton has stated that as one of his largest failures in his administration. President Trump has made a definitive decision to actively engage and stop the killing in Nigeria, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. You all have used a word that I think is very apt in this, and this is prioritization. And as Chairman Smith put it perfectly in his opening statement of this hearing when he spoke with the senior officials of the Nigerian government, is that we do want to work with them. We have the opportunity here. I think the Nigerians have an opportunity to deepen and strengthen their relationship with the United States if they will prioritize the protection of these communities. Of course, non-Christians are being killed too. We're not saying that's not happening, but there is a systematic targeted campaign that's happening here. I met with that same delegation, same as Chairman Smith did, and some of the feedback we were getting is a little bit of that same misdirection. But let's not turn a blind eye to what's happening. Let's not believe our lying eyes, right? One thing I'd want to point out here is we've had religious organizations and advocacy groups have been calling for humanitarian assistance in the Middle Belt region. And my understanding is that the Tinubu administration has not specifically requested it. That's why it's not there. They just have to ask for it, and our State Department will then provide that assistance to those organizations on the ground. That is a perfect example of prioritization and indifference to what is happening here. So that would be a great, to use your department's term, confidence building measure on the part of the Tinubu government in this, if they are serious about this. Because I can promise you President Trump is. He is very serious about this. A question that I have for you is, the Nigerian Constitution prohibits the ownership of firearms. But somehow these Fulani militants operating in the middle belt of region of the country, they're all armed. And we're not talking about ISIS. We're not talking about Boko Haram. Why hasn't there been some type of move or campaign by the Nigerian government to disarm these militants that are operating there, where we're seeing a lot of this killing that is coming from them? They have access to AK-47s and other small arms to slaughter Christians. Is this something that you've been talking to the Nigerian government about? Because I think it would actually have a serious impact, and it is something that I raised with the Nigerian government officials when we met with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Moore, and thank you also for your service on this task force that will be providing recommendations and your meetings with the Nigerian officials. Appreciate that. I think that this is an excellent suggestion as part of the strategy that we are putting together, in particular to talk about the policing aspect of this. in what is happening in the Middle Belt so that we can focus resources and have specific recommendations on actions that the Nigerian government can take. I very much appreciate that suggestion.
Yeah, it just seems to make all the sense in the world to me. It's like, here we are. I mean, I understand we're not going to get like ISIS to lay their arms down. That's probably more of a kinetic option there that's going to result in their arms no longer being brought up in anger against Christians. But in any event, this seems to be something that, obviously, I'm not saying it's easy, but it is something that they should be doing, they should be looking at. And while I got just a couple seconds left, I would urge the Nigerian government to take a look at pardoning Sunday Jackson, who is an individual who was fighting for his own life, defending his life against one of these Fulani militants. That Fulani militant lost his life in that struggle, and now that person, Sunday Jackson's facing the death penalty. Now, where's the justice in that? Where is the justice in that? And all these Fulani militants are breaking the law. They are breaking Nigerian law. And so this Sunday Jackson disarms this person with a knife, protects his own life. He's going to prison and now faces the death penalty. And Fulani militants just roaming bands of them with AK-47s, and that's no problem. You are so right about this question of prioritization. I know I'm over time, Mr. Chairman, but I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moore, for your leadership, and do appreciate it very much. Mr. Stutzman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership on not only this issue, but so many other issues related to life and to religious freedom. I want to thank the ranking chairman as well, and appreciate the witnesses for being here. You know, before I begin, I just think it's really important to recognize that, you know, what is happening in Nigeria, it's not unique, and that's why religious freedom really matters. It's the core foundation of our Constitution. I mean, I would argue that you can't have economic freedom if you don't have religious freedom. I've been doing some work with the new administration and the changes that are happening in the Middle East and Syria. And, you know, Syria is a very diverse country, and it's so critical for them to have religious freedom and respect. It goes both ways. And I think it's really important, and I think could have a huge impact if Christians and Muslims and Jews and, you know, name all of the religions, if we would all stand together and condemn violence, condemn this sort of violence that's happening in Nigeria, condemn the violence that's happening in Suwaida in Syria against the Druze and against the Christians and against those that, you know, would push back. I appreciate President Trump, who I believe is the strongest diplomat. He's the strongest negotiator, and especially when it comes to religious freedom. He's been willing to call it out around the world. And so we have this opportunity as Americans to really push the importance of respecting religious freedom and it really being part of the fabric of every country. It's also important for us here at home. I mean, you know, not only is religious freedom important around the world, but it's really important for us here at home. I mean, the last thing we want to see is threats to religious liberty in the United States. We need to be the example, and rather than just looking at others. I mean, we have, of course, a very strong, diverse nation as well. One of the things I want to ask and get to is we talked a lot about the tools that the administration has. Senator Cruz and I introduced legislation that would redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. And again, of course, very disappointed to see that was revoked during the Biden administration and the steps back that has caused there. I want to ask, Daniel Ada is from Benin. He's as a candidate for president. I just visited with him. He's a friend of mine. I was asking him, since Benin is right next door to Nigeria, what are we seeing in the surrounding areas? Are we seeing some of the same attacks and atrocities in other countries? And is there any sort of coalition? I know the Nigerian government is acting like this isn't happening, but is there any sort of coalition being led by us or within the region to fight back and to push back? You know, I appreciate Mr. Moore's comments about disarming the jihadists and those who are attacking, but is there any discussion about arming the innocent as well, as in making sure that they have the ability to defend themselves with their local law enforcement, and is local law enforcement working for them? So a couple of questions in there, but I'd be happy to hear from either one of you.
Thank you, Representative. The security problems, very, very serious ones that exist across the littoral states of Africa are common and are shared, especially in the north, as we see more and more terrorist insurgent action. And so this is a shared problem. We at the State Department, but especially the Department of War and AFRICOM, have focused very heavily on sharing intelligence and trying to create the type of cooperation that you referred to between those countries, so that they're sharing information, using best practices, sharing intelligence with each other to be more effective. In terms of the particular problem that we are discussing today, this targeted attacks against Christians, it is most acute in the Middle Belt of Nigeria.
One of the things that we know in the Middle East is looking at the curriculums that are taught in schools, and especially some of the curriculum that we saw that was being taught in Gaza to the young children about killing a Jewish soldier is something worthy of. I mean, do we see this sort of education system at all in these countries? Because what are the young people learning? Are they learning to be pursuing peace and prosperity? Or are they also being taught anywhere in these schools some sort of jihadist activity is worthy of accomplishing?
I refer to my colleague from DRL as well, since they publish reports on this that cover some of these issues.
Sure. So you'll see in our human rights reports where we call out human rights violations across countries around the world. In terms of Nigeria's curriculum in particular, I don't have that information right in front of me, but we're happy to report back to you on the committee.
Sure. No, that's fine. I appreciate you both, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing.
Thank you for your questions and comments. We are joined by the former chairman of the Africa Subcommittee, who is now over at the Energy and Commerce Committee, John James, and I want to thank him. February of 2024, he had a very important hearing on Nigeria and other advocacy throughout that time. So the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your personal invitation, for your leadership, and for your friendship. I'm honored to be back. Psalms 96:14 asks, "Who will rise up for me against the wicked? Who will take a stand for me against evildoers?" Nigeria is facing one of the gravest religious freedom crises in the world. As the former chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Africa, I have visited and have seen firsthand the direness of the conditions in what is now the deadliest place on earth to be a Christian. They are targeted, displaced, and killed simply for their faith. The ancient plea, "Is there no help for the widow's son?" still echoes today. Since 2019, nearly 17,000 Christians have been killed. In the first 7 months of this year alone, hundreds more were murdered. On June 13th, during the Yellowwater massacre, more than 280 Christians were slaughtered in a single day. These are not isolated tragedies, but a sustained pattern of religiously motivated violence, often ignored or even enabled by the Nigerian government. Extremist groups like Boko Haram, Fulani militants, and ISIS West Africa attack often without any meaningful intervention from authorities. The lack of response has created an atmosphere of impunity where Christians continue to live in constant threat and fear. The United States has previously recognized this crisis. President Trump not only designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern during his first term, but redesignated it again in his second term after President Biden inexplicably removed that designation. Religious persecution is tied to political repression and weakening institutions in Nigeria. Example, the detention of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu is a clear example. In 2022, Nigeria's Court of Appeal struck down the charges against him and ordered his release. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has also called for his unconditional release. Yet he remains in solitary confinement, in deteriorating health, and recently had to represent himself in court. Nigeria has signaled that the law is optional and targeting Christians is fair game. Just hours ago this morning, despite the pleas and cries of the Nigerian people and many Nigerian lawmakers, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu was convicted on all charges. For fiscal year 2025, the U.S. has requested nearly $8 billion for sub-Saharan Africa. But when Americans see political prisoners, judicial defiance, and the slaughter of Christians, they understandably ask as they meet their own struggles, why should our tax dollars support governments that refuse to protect their own people? Is our aid aiding a genocide? Nigeria is a nation of tremendous potential, but that potential is being choked out by violent persecution of its Christian population. No country can build a stable future where churches are burned, believers are killed, and communities live in fear. The United States must stay engaged, and Nigeria must change course now. Mr. Pratt, a direct question. Do you believe, in your professional assessment, that the government of Nigeria has been infiltrated by jihadists?
I do not believe that the government of Nigeria has been infiltrated by jihadists.
Okay, because when you look at the selective enforcement of the rule of law, one might question if there are any favoritism or looking the other way when groups are being specifically targeted, despite the fact, as my colleague Mr. Moore mentioned, not enforcing the rule of law with regard to weapons. My next question, how has the Nigerian government reacted since President Trump's country of particular concern designation announcement?
They have taken the designation very seriously. There is a senior delegation here now. They will meet with the most senior officials of the U.S. government this week. And we have already demarched the government in Abuja and here in Washington on the action plan. And I can say that the results so far have been positive in terms of cooperation.
The Nigerian government needs to do more to address this issue themselves, but what measures are being taken to assist Nigeria to increase its focus on persecution, particularly in the Middle Belt?
Yeah, so thank you for your question, Congressman James. As you mentioned, the Middle Belt is a particular concern. That's where Christians, you mentioned Yelawada, where 250 or 280 Christians were killed, massacred. They were targeted because they were Christians. Churches have been burned there. There have been internally displaced people there. And so we're reviewing all options at the State Department, including Chairman Smith, you mentioned on our bureau, we have Global Magnitsky Act sanctions. We have other tools at our disposal as well.